My name is Vasti Torres. I'm the Dean of the College of Education at the University of South Florida, and it's a pleasure to talk to you about my research and how my own understanding of my own growing up influenced the way I see college students growing up today. I was lucky enough to be able to do a longitudinal study of Latino college students in urban settings. And what I began to see early on is that the students lacked self confidence to be successful in the classroom. And during the analysis, it was clear it was not an academic deficiency issue. It was more about their sense of self and how they felt they could succeed. And these impressions really hit home. And as I was doing this research, I started thinking about my own experiences as an undergraduate and all of my doubts about whether or not I could be successful. And that drove me to look at their experiences differently and to begin to look at the literature about what is happening to students of color. And I ran across the research by Claude Steele, a psychologist who has researched stereotype threat and the concept that stereotypes provide negative images to certain groups of people. And if we believe those negative images, it gets internalized into our identity. And that internalization into an identity can really affect students' ability to feel like they can be successful in college. And this really began to resonate with some of the stories the students were telling me. So, for example, I would have a student say, well, I have this very thick accent when I speak English, and I just don't think I'm as smart. And I'd say, well, why do you think you're not as smart? And they would talk about the behaviors that faculty members wouldn't pay attention to them. Peers in their classroom would not want to work on group projects with them. And they internalized that as people with accents are not as smart as native speakers. And so I began to look at the process of how do students begin to turn those negative images into positive images. So we all have stereotypes that can affect our performance. Women are not good at math. Latinos are always late. All those kinds of things that make us very sensitive about our identity, whether it's race, ethnicity, or gender, or any kind of ism. We all have heard negative images that make us question our ability and question our sense of belonging in certain academic locations. As a result of looking at this, what I found is that in order for students to really change a negative image into a positive image, it's really a cognitive process. They have to be able to see multiple perspectives. They have to evaluate those multiple perspectives, whether they believe them or not, and then determine their own beliefs. That is not an easy process. And I think sometimes we approach it as if we just tell students they're fine, they're going to do okay, that it will change. And that's not actually the way it works. So this line of research led me to the recognition that even being able to recognize racism is a developmental task. We assume that everyone can see a racist act and identify it, when in reality, today, racism is much more micro and much more, you might say, nuanced. And in order for people to recognize racism, they have to be able to see what's happening and actually accept it. So in my longitudinal research, I actually had students who shared experiencing racism, and the process they used to make meaning of that was that they didn't actually tell anyone when it happened to them. They actually kept it a secret. They were ashamed, again, internalizing those negative images. And it wasn't until some time later that they finally told someone who they trusted, and that person helped them make meaning of it. So this is an example that we assume a blatant act of racism will immediately be recognized as racism, and that's not actually true. And some of these were, in my mind, blatant, like a waitress saying to a group of Mexican-American students, "We don't serve your kind here." And them sort of saying, well, what's wrong with me? What does she mean by my kind? And so it was a meaning-making process for them. Now, there's two things that I think are critical for student affairs practitioners. One is very few of the students in my longitudinal study actually reached out to student affairs practitioners to help them make meaning. And that's too bad. The majority of the students made meaning of figuring out what is racism in the classroom, through faculty, through discussion, through readings that they were assigned in the classroom. And this is where I think we're falling a little bit short. We have such opportunities to help students make meaning of what is happening in their lives, but we need to kind of think about three things that are really critical in my mind. First of all, simplistic responses like, oh, you'll get over it, sure you can do it, that's no problem, oh, don't be so sensitive, don't work. In essence, you are confirming their negative images. You have to ask them, why do you believe that? Why is it that you believe that? That's starting the process of negative images. Shared that English is actually my second language. I was just given diction classes in the third grade. And so the next year when I interviewed her, I asked her, well, how are you doing? And she was doing much better. And I said, well, what changed for you? And she said, well, when I talked to you about having an accent, I realized having an accent means I speak two languages and you don't. And so that's the ability to transform that negative image into something positive. Now, as a student affairs practitioner, you've got to take the time to ask the student, why do you believe that? And help them recognize some of those negative images. The second thing is we're really good at exposing students to difference, getting them to maybe look at someone different, maybe having them meet someone different, but we're not very good at the meaning-making process. Exposure is not enough. You have to be able to make meaning. You can expose someone to something new, something different, and they can walk away and say, well, that's nice. I feel sorry for those people. And a good friend of mine once called that cultural voyeurism. And that's exactly sometimes what we do. It's the meaning-making process that makes the world of difference. Students have to be able to question their own beliefs, to ask why it is that I should change my mind about something, and to determine whether or not they believe this new information. Without those latter pieces, all you're doing is showing something different. You're not actually changing minds, and you're not actually making a difference for that student, which is a critical piece. The final thing that I want to make sure that we understand as student affairs practitioners is that students of color are much more likely to talk about these things with a trusted other. And you have to ask yourself, what does a trusting relationship look like in your role? You cannot assume because you have a big title, or frankly, once you become dean of a college, they're all scared of you. So you definitely cannot assume that they're going to trust you. You have to ask yourself, how do I develop a trusting relationship with the students who need to have someone guide them through the process, help them make meaning? You can't just assume because you have a nice title that students are going to come to you. So in essence, I'm hoping that all of you are thinking about ways that you can make a difference by spending a little bit more time asking the why question. Why do you believe that? And by really reflecting how you are creating trusting relationships with students of color. And frankly, it's not just students of color. It's a lot of students who have negative images embedded into their identity as a result of whatever social identity they possess, whether it be low income, women, racial, or ethnic. Not to credit to me, I was reading, I just keep up with things that are interesting to me around racism, and someone pointed out that the student riots at Ohio State were students celebrating the national championship, but the same behavior is called destructive in Ferguson.